The unthinkable is happening right now in Canada. Premier Danielle Smith of Alberta has just made a statement that could literally tear the country apart. She's promising to hold a referendum on Alberta's separation from Canada if enough signatures are gathered. And folks, those signatures are being collected as we speak. We're not talking about empty threats anymore. This is real, this is happening, and if Alberta actually leaves, it would trigger the biggest constitutional crisis in Canadian history, potentially ending Canada as we know it. The ripple effects would be felt from coast to coast, affecting everything from your pension to the price of oil, and yes, even the value of the Canadian dollar could collapse overnight. Before we dive into this explosive story, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Give this video a thumbs up if you want to stay informed about what's really happening in Canadian politics, and drop a comment below telling me what you think. Will Alberta actually leave Canada? Your engagement helps us bring you more of these critical updates that the mainstream media won't tell you. Let's get the facts straight first. Just weeks after Mark Carney's Liberal Party won the federal election in April, beating Pierre Poilievre in what many called a stunning reversal, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith made her most controversial statement yet. She didn't just hint at separation, she made a concrete promise. Smith reiterated that she would hold a referendum on provincial separation in 2026 if citizens gather the required signatures on a petition. This isn't political posturing anymore. This is a premier laying down the gauntlet. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Smith recently passed new legislation that makes it dramatically easier for separatists to force this referendum. Activists would need signatures from a reduced fraction of Albertans to force a referendum, thanks to a new UCP bill. She's essentially lowered the bar for what could become the most consequential vote in Canadian history. Think about that for a moment. She's making it easier for people to potentially break up the country. Now, Smith claims she doesn't want separation. She says she wants a sovereign Alberta within a united Canada. But here's the problem with that statement. You can't have it both ways. You can't claim you want unity while simultaneously making it easier to achieve separation. It's like saying you want to stay married while filing divorce papers and making it easier for your spouse to leave you. The timing of all this is absolutely crucial. After the Liberal Party's win in the federal election, the leader introduced legislation to make it easier for residents to force a provincial referendum. This isn't coincidence. This is a direct response to Mark Carney becoming Prime Minister. Alberta's government is essentially saying, we don't like the election results, so we're going to make it easier to leave the country entirely. Let's talk about what's really driving this. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith has been following a plan laid out by her Chief of Staff, Rob Anderson, which calls for increased sovereignty, or independence, for the province. It is driven by full-throated support for the oil and gas industry. This isn't about provincial rights or constitutional principles. This is about oil, pure and simple. Alberta wants to extract and export oil without federal interference, and they're willing to break up Canada to do it. The economic implications of this are staggering. Alberta contributes approximately 15% of Canada's GDP. If they leave, the economic shock would be unprecedented. The Canadian dollar would likely plummet, federal transfer payments to other provinces would be drastically reduced, and the entire fiscal framework of Canada would collapse. Quebec would immediately start talking about their own separation again, and we could see the complete dissolution of Canada within a decade. But here's what makes this even more dangerous. There are groups already working toward this goal with specific deadlines. A group called the Commonwealth of Alberta delegation to Washington recently said they are committed to a successful independence referendum to create an independent Commonwealth of Alberta prior to December 15, 2025. These aren't fringe activists anymore. These are organized groups with concrete timelines and international connections. Smith's strategy here is politically brilliant, but constitutionally devastating. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith says she's willing to risk a separation referendum. In part to avert the emergence of a political rival, she's using the threat of separation to maintain political control within Alberta. She's essentially saying to more extreme separatist voices, don't start your own party, I'll give you what you want through the referendum process. The federal response to this has been remarkably muted, which is concerning. When a province is actively preparing the legal framework for separation, you'd expect a stronger response from Ottawa. But Carney's government seems to be hoping this will just go away. That's a dangerous miscalculation. What makes this situation even more volatile is the growing anti-federal sentiment in Alberta. Premier says she wants to lower separatist sentiment, but her political base's anti-Ottawa mood is becoming an anti-Canada mood. This isn't just about disagreeing with federal policies anymore. This is becoming a fundamental rejection of Canadian identity itself. Indigenous leaders are sounding the alarm about this. Premier Danielle Smith has said it would be up to Albertans, not her government, to put the separation question on a ballot. But Indigenous chiefs are accusing Smith of stoking separatism talk, and they have a point. When a premier creates the legal framework for separation and then says it's up to the people, that's not neutral leadership. That's facilitation. The international implications are enormous, too. If Alberta separates, what happens to NAFTA? What happens to Canada's seat at the G7? What happens to NATO commitments? A separated Alberta would be a landlocked country entirely dependent on either Canada or the United States for access to global markets. They'd essentially become an American client state, which would fundamentally alter the balance of power in North America. Here's the most shocking part of all this: the polls. While most Albertans still oppose separation, the numbers are shifting. The constant talk of separation, combined with economic grievances and federal-provincial tensions, is normalizing an idea that was once considered fringe. When political leaders repeatedly discuss something as a legitimate option, public opinion follows. Smith's defenders will say she's just responding to grassroots pressure. But that's not how leadership works. Leaders don't just follow public opinion, they shape it. By creating legal pathways for separation and constantly discussing it as a legitimate option, Smith is actively encouraging separatist sentiment even while claiming to oppose it. The legal pathway she's created is particularly concerning. By lowering the threshold for forcing a referendum, she's made separation more likely, not less. But to actually win separation, they must climb a much higher wall, and most oppose the idea. However, referendums have a way of taking on lives of their own. Look at Brexit. Most experts thought it would fail, but once the campaign started, emotions took over from economics. What happens if they actually get the signatures? What happens if a referendum is called? Even if separation loses, the very act of holding the vote would damage Canada's international reputation, create economic uncertainty, and encourage other provinces to consider their own referendums. It's a lose-lose situation for Canadian unity. The federal government needs to wake up to this threat. This isn't just Alberta politics anymore. This is a direct challenge to Canadian sovereignty. When a provincial premier creates legal mechanisms for separation and promises to use them, that's not provincial politics. That's potential treason. The federal government has constitutional responsibilities to preserve the union, and they're not meeting them. The question now isn't whether Alberta will hold a separation referendum. Smith has promised they will if they get the signatures, and those signatures are being collected. The question is whether the federal government will act to prevent the breakup of Canada, or whether they'll just watch it happen. This is the most serious threat to Canadian unity since the Quebec referendum of 1995, but it might actually be worse. Quebec's separation would have been devastating, but Canada would have survived. Alberta's separation, combined with its economic importance and the precedent it would set, could trigger a complete dissolution of the Canadian Federation. Danielle. Smith claims she wants to lower separatist sentiment, but every action she's taken has had the opposite effect. She's created legal pathways for separation, lowered the barriers to forcing a referendum, and legitimized separatist arguments. These aren't the actions of someone trying to preserve unity. These are the actions of someone preparing for separation while maintaining plausible deniability. The international community is watching this closely. A successful Alberta separation would inspire separatist movements worldwide and would fundamentally alter the global balance of power. It would prove that even stable, prosperous democracies can be torn apart by regional grievances and populist politics. The economic argument for separation is deeply flawed, but economics rarely drive these decisions. Emotions do. And the emotions in Alberta right now are running towards separation, not away from it. Smith's policies are feeding those emotions, not cooling them. Here's what needs to happen immediately. The federal government needs to engage directly with Alberta on their economic grievances. They need to find ways to address legitimate concerns about resource development and federal policies. But they also need to make it clear that separation is not a legitimate constitutional option and that they will use all legal means to preserve the Union. Canadians across the country need to understand what's at stake here. This isn't just about Alberta. This is about the survival of Canada itself. If we lose Alberta, we lose the country. It's that simple. The economic, political, and social consequences would be irreversible. The next few months are going to be critical. Signature collection is ongoing, Smith has promised to honor the referendum process, and separatist groups are working toward specific deadlines. This is not a drill. This is not political theater. This is the real possibility of Canadian disintegration happening in real time. What can you do? Stay informed, engage with the political process, and make your voice heard. Contact your federal representatives and demand they take this threat seriously. Don't assume this will just go away. Quebec came within a percentage point of leaving in 1995, and Alberta's economic grievances are arguably more serious now than Quebec's cultural grievances were then. The unthinkable is becoming thinkable in Canadian politics. Premier Danielle Smith's shocking statement isn't just political rhetoric, it's a roadmap to the potential end of Canada as we know it. The question now is whether Canadians will wake up to this threat before it's too late, or whether we'll sleepwalk into the greatest constitutional crisis in our nation's history. This story is far from over, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Canada's survival as a unified country is now genuinely in question, and it all started with one premier's promise to hold a referendum that could change everything forever.